Hello, everyone. Before we start our episode with Aurélie Daher on her book, Hezbollah, Mobilization and Power, a short note. This episode was recorded before Hassan Nasrallah's assassination, and therefore we still talk about him as if he's still alive. In the next coming episode, we will comment on his assassination and, of course, also on some outlook on the repercussions on Hezbollah and the region. For now, enjoy this introductory episode on Hezbollah together with Aurélie Daher. Herzlich willkommen zu 99:1. Welcome to 99:1. This is an English episode. The reason for why this is English, I'm going to explain now. I have been looking around in German, of course, for some literature, maybe just an article, some reliable information on Hezbollah, the organization that is in everyone's mouth these days, especially here in Germany. And most people here do not know anything about them other than that they are a terror organization that tries to attack and destroy Israel. So we've been looking into people that could talk to us and give us a little bit of a background as to what this organization actually is, maybe talk about their history, their goals, their ideology. And there simply isn't anything in German. So I started looking in English, and surprisingly, I also didn't find that much. There is some stuff around, but most of it is quite old. Also questionable how reliable this is. But then I found this book. It's called Hezbollah, Mobilization and Power, and it's by Aurélie Daher. And that is really an excellent account. It's a little bit aged. I think it's from 2013 or 14. She can tell us in a second. But it gives an excellent historical and political analysis on this movement and what it is and how one can understand also its actions today. And that's why I got in contact with Aurélie, and we decided to make a small series, probably something like 3 or 4 episodes, talking about Hezbollah, its history, the analysis. And this one is going to be the introductory episode, where we are going to give basically a primer on Hezbollah and talk a little bit about, how to understand it in the first place before one goes into more detail and depth regarding its history and politics. But before we start and we bring Aurélie in, let's do a short intro. Aurélie is a French, English, and Arabic-speaking academic who teaches political science and the sociology of conflicts at University of Paris-Dauphine. Okay, now I'm going to practice my French. Institut Pratique du Journalisme and Sciences Po Paris. I hope I didn't butcher that. So she holds a master degree in public management from ESCP Europe, as well as a master degree in political science, a DEA in sociology of the Muslim world, and a PhD in political science from Sciences Po Paris. Her research focuses on Hezbollah, Middle Eastern Shiaism, Lebanese and Middle Eastern politics. She also works on the new aspects of Middle Eastern jihadism and its repercussions on European societies. So far, so good. Without further ado, I introduce Aurélie. And the funny thing, Aurélie, is I put your name down under my picture too, so I should change that and call myself Nadim, who I am. Welcome to 99:1, Aurélie.
Thank you. Thank you for the invitation.
No, it's great to have you here. It's really, I want to reiterate this. I'm not all the way through, like half. It's really an amazing book. This is actually the foundation for it is your PhD thesis, I think.
Yes, absolutely.
Exactly. So it's also a quite academic book. It's a lot of content, but I do really wholeheartedly recommend this to anybody who wants to know something about Hezbollah to get that book and read it. And
Thank you.
Of course, listen to this episode and episodes that are coming up. But Aurélie, maybe you just heard my account, how it felt like finding something on Hezbollah out there. Maybe you can give us a short intro just about that book. Why did you write it? What was your goal with writing that? What did you want to do with this? And maybe one other question that can also give some kind of outlook. would you change something to it if you were to write a second edition, or maybe add something to it now? Just shoot about that, please.
Okay. Well, actually, it's funny you ask. It's funny you ask, because initially I never wanted to write a book on Hezbollah. I didn't even want to do research on Hezbollah. A little bit maybe of my private life, my personal account of my life, because that life is actually what led to the book. So as my name shows, so my dad is Lebanese from South Lebanon, and from a village that is at the exact jointure of the three borders, Lebanon, Syria, and Israel, Palestine. It's called Sheba. Everybody who is interested in the Middle East probably heard about that area. And so my Lebanese family on my father's side come from there, but my mom is French. And at some point, so my dad, who was living in France with his wife and his children, decided to go back to Lebanon. And that was 1985, meaning 10 years after the start of the civil war. Everybody was trying to run away from Lebanon. And my dad, very weirdly, was one of the few who wanted to go back to Lebanon. But 85 is also the year where a very famous today organization declared its existence to the world, and that's Hezbollah. Hezbollah officially announced to the world that it was there, talked a little bit about its goals, etc., in an open letter in 1985. Now, what is interesting here is I was 8-9 years old. I didn't speak a word of Arabic, and eventually my family couldn't go and move into the south because it was occupied by Israel since 1982. We had a civil war in Beirut. My dad initially wanted to settle in Beirut. So for very complicated reason, long story short, we ended up settling in the north in a city called Baalbek, which happens to be the crib town of Hezbollah. This is where everything started. This is where Hezbollah was initially created. So here I am, 8 years old. I don't speak a word of Arabic, and I am in the city of an organization that is now becoming public, shows itself in the public space, called Hezbollah. So what happened is, for years, I went to school, I grew up, I had friends, I played soccer, because when I was a kid, I used to play football, soccer, I'm not talking American football, with boys, who years later joined Hezbollah and became, actually for some of them, very big toes in the organization. And for me, Hezbollah was just a regular thing. They're just average guys. Yeah, okay, they're fighting Israel, but both. And what happened is, years later, so I'm in France, Sciences Po Paris, studying political science. I want to do a PhD. And my supervisor was like, oh my God, you should do something on Hezbollah, because you have the context, they trust you, you know the language, the culture, the whatever. So it should be something easy, and you have an access that nobody else could have as a scholar, or maybe it would take 10 years, 15 years for a scholar to have almost the same access you have. And I remember I said, oh no, please, it's going to be boring. Hezbollah is so average. There's nothing. That was, I have to be honest here. It was November 2004. November 2004.
Before the war, yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. Just before the war. It was 4 years after Israel left Lebanon, withdrew from Lebanon. So Hezbollah at that time, they were, the guys who were getting a little bit chubby, getting a little bit, growing a belly from non-action. Their old Kalashnikovs were getting rusty. They were spending way more energy on, communication, and they were becoming a little bit bourgeois on the side. So I was like, why do you want me to work on Hezbollah? That's going to be boring. There's nothing. It's a has-been kind of a topic. And he was like, are you kidding? The whole West is interested in that mystery called Hezbollah. Nobody understands it. And I said, well, that's the problem of the West. I don't care, And he said, no, you swam with the sharks. That's the expression he used. You swam with the sharks, so you're doing it. Otherwise, no money for your PhD. And, a girl has to... Yeah, and a girl has to make, has to pay the rent. So eventually I was like, okay, I'm doing this. And because I know the guys and I have the access, I know the language, probably I'll be done in a year and a half. And then once I have my PhD, I'll get a job, I'll get a position in academia, and then I'll work on whatever I want. Definitely not Hezbollah. And the problem is, I started my PhD in November 2004, and just a few months later, February 2005, huge explosion in Beirut, assassination of the former Prime Minister Rafik Hariri. And guess what? This is the start for my topic to become the hottest topic in the history of the PhDs at Sciences It took me eventually 6 years to finish it. I defended it in January 2011. And I was like, okay, this is the last work I do on Hezbollah. Now I'm going to find a postdoc contract and do something else on a different topic. But guess what? Early 2011, here comes the Arab Spring. And here comes a year later, a civil war in Syria. And Hezbollah goes regional. So I'm like, all righty, I'm on Hezbollah once again. And years later, here we are, 2024. I'm still working on Hezbollah.
Yeah, and this time I found you definitely, but yeah.
And then you asked, so what's so special about the book? Well, the thing is, when I started my PhD, obviously, I did things by the book. So I started to read the literature on Hezbollah. And this is where I understood the concern of my supervisor, because what I read, because there were a certain number of books and academic journals, obviously, who published articles on Hezbollah, I was like, that's not Hezbollah. That's absolutely not Hezbollah. That's not the Hezbollah I know. That's not the Hezbollah I saw emerge and grow. And that's absolutely not Hezbollah. And eventually, so I did my little research about the sources, where does that complete misconception, misreading of Hezbollah come from? And eventually, I understood what happened. And at the end of the day, I don't want to blame anybody. I don't want to blame that initial literature that was, even if it was completely shaky and unfortunately really shaped the vision till today that the West has on Hezbollah. But because what happened is this: Hezbollah was an object of research for the secret services, the intel world, way before it became one for academia. Academia was a little bit slow to pick up the topic. So what happened is we had people working mainly for Western intel. I'm talking whether the Mossad, CIA, French DGSE, MI5, who obviously noticed Hezbollah from the beginning, wanted to know what it was, etc. The problem is Hezbollah for many years was very clandestine. It is still clandestine, or at least a part of it. But at that time, all of it was clandestine. It wasn't easy to get an interview with, especially even communication people. Today, you have people in the party who are dedicated to the external communication. You cannot meet whoever you want, obviously, but they have a team that is in charge with communicating with the external world. They didn't have that at the beginning, and they were rather on the defensive line. They don't want to talk to anybody, they don't want to meet anybody, they don't want to let anyone approach them. So eventually, what the intel did is they did the best they could with what they could get. Plus, there was the language barrier. What I found, most of the intel who published things on Hezbollah at that time, they didn't speak Arabic. They always had to go through translation, which is a problem. Another thing is most of them remained stationed in Beirut, where basically the Hezbollah phenomenon was not a Beiruti one. It was everything was happening in the Bekaa Valley in Baalbek, and the intel didn't bother, sending people there, and especially for a long period of time, and really try to understand, from deep inside what the heck was that thing. So the book here is a kind of a reset. The book basically is a deconstruction of years of literature, of shaky literature and misconceptions and myths a lot of myth about Hezbollah, starting with the one, it's Iran who created Hezbollah in order to export the Islamic revolution to Arab countries and then participate in the Arab-Israeli conflict. No, absolutely not. It didn't work like that. And actually, Khomeini himself was completely against the idea. So by growing up, or thanks to the fact that I grew up in the city where everything started, and I had, the context I managed to get primary sources, very initial original leaflets, pictures of the time, and obviously testimonies of the people who started it, the people, or at least who were part of Hezbollah when it really, really started and was still green. And,
because you basically knew them from your childhood, basically, right? From school and also, from the neighborhoods, etc.
Yes. I also talk about things like, I have a personal joke about it. I was like, I never knew, or it took me some years to realize that the first field work I did on Hezbollah for my research was when I was 8 years old. I was already a sociologist at 8 years old. I didn't know it. So I bring into the book a lot of anecdotes, personal anecdotes of how it was to live under that very early, very young Hezbollah in the early 80s, and how it evolved through time. So I write eventually in this book, I managed to write the first history, solid at least, history of the beginnings of Hezbollah and the main years of Hezbollah. I also managed to give a more solid and reliable account of the internal function, the internal organization, how it works, the membership, etc. How do you enter? How do you become a member? What it happens once you're in, etc. The how it's organized, the structure, the internal rules and regulations. Because we did have a few things before that, but they were mainly published in, as I said, security/defense kind of papers, and most of them was more about fantasized perceptions than something solid. I also wrote the first extensive part on, or a survey on, the social action apparatus of Hezbollah, all the institutions. I make a list of all the institutions, and I explain at the end of the day, their means, what are they used to, what's their purpose. And then again, also I also criticize a lot of myths, starting with the one that Hezbollah, for instance, distributes a lot of money to the Shia, and that's why it is popular, or threatens people with their weapons. This is also why they keep winning elections. All sorts of cliches and ideas we had in the West that you could read in almost most papers on Hezbollah. Basically, I re-explain and I rebuild a totally different model of what it is. I also give the first long biography of Hassan Nasrallah. Nobody had ever really presented the personage, the character, before I wrote the book. So the first part of the book, the first 4 or 5 chapters are about I present Hezbollah, but from scratch. I rewrite the whole thing from scratch. The second part of the book is more, it's between sociology and history, where I focus this time on Hezbollah as a political actor on the domestic scene, how it reasons, why it joined the Lebanese institutions. Again, we have a lot of wrong ideas about what Hezbollah does in the Lebanese state, and why it has such a powerful impact in Lebanese politics. So I rewrite all that, I re-explain, and in the same time, what I do is write a history of contemporary Lebanon, especially the March 14 era, I would say, between 2005 and 2014. This is where the book ends, 2014, which is basically 2 years or a year and a half after Hezbollah became regional by going to Syria. So the book is about redefining properly what Hezbollah is about, bringing substance, information that was never published before. Again, it's from scratch. 90% of what I bring is primary sources. One critique that I usually have by my colleagues is, you don't quote a lot of your colleagues, you don't mention other books. And well, that's the problem when you do something from scratch and you restart a whole process. You don't use the formal literature, you just create a new one.
You only quote them in order to tell them that they're wrong, basically.
Yeah, some of them. I was
Exactly.
able to interview with some of them. Yes, some of them, but not all of them.
Yes.
So that's basically the book. And to answer your question about what I would do differently if I were to update it today, well, basically the book, exactly as I said, stops when Hezbollah suddenly mutates into something way bigger than his home country. It goes regional. So I already have a lot of material on that. I'm gathering a lot of material, 10 years of material. As the problem is, as a scholar and who teaches a lot, I don't find enough time to write. But yes, I would say initially I thought about adding a chapter, but I think that with everything that happened in the last 10 years, I need another book about exactly that, about that regional Hezbollah. That is a little bit different than the domestic Hezbollah and the Hezbollah who just, fought on its territory, on the Lebanese territory, against an army of occupation.
Yeah, I'll be sure in one of the later episodes to pick your brain also on these more recent developments. But maybe let's get started a little bit with the introduction to Hezbollah. So maybe let me just repeat this. You already brought these points up. Hezbollah here in Germany, probably also in France, in the West in general, is depicted as first and foremost a terror organization. It's somehow dedicated to the destruction of Israel. Then if somebody asks, okay, but why? What's happening? Then immediately Iran pops up. Yeah, it's a proxy of Iran. Iran created Hezbollah. Hezbollah is, does Iran's bidding. What you already mentioned, the export of the Islamic Revolution. Although I must say in Germany, most of these analphabets don't even know anymore what the Islamic Revolution is. Yeah, so they don't even bring that talking point here anymore.
But there's also a generational thing.
Yeah, probably. Yeah, exactly.
The young today never heard about 1979, and you don't.
Exactly. So maybe let's like you did in your book and like you explained, let's start from scratch. So how did Hezbollah start, and what was it about initially?
Okay. Well, actually, it all really began in 1982. So basically 40 years ago. Hezbollah is not a youngster organization. So what happened is this. In 1982, Israel massively invaded Lebanon, and for the second time. The previous one was in 1978, so 4 years before. But now in 1982, 1982 is an ambitious invasion, way more than 78. The point for the Israelis, one of the points, is to bring to the presidency. Okay, we have presidential elections that summer. So the idea is to bring to the presidency in Lebanon the leader of the far-right Christian militias. That is an ally at that time of Israel, a person called Bashir Gemayel. He's at the head of the Lebanese forces. But the objective for the Israelis is also to help the same militia to get rid of the armed Palestinian groups that had taken up residence in Lebanon in a significant way in the early 70s, to the point that they created what some depicted as a state within the state in South Lebanon. For the Israelis, finally, and maybe even more importantly, the point was to even actually annexate a part of the Lebanese territory, because at the time, the Israelis had their eye on the water of a river that is in southern Lebanon called the Litani River. It's roughly at 30 kilometers to the north of the border of the southern border of Lebanon, and that's a river that is very rich in water all year round. And it's common knowledge that the Israelis have always had serious water issues, so they're poor in water. So the Israelis in 82 also, so they intended to push back their border with Lebanon to the north, and to reclaim the Litani as the new border, to benefit obviously from the water of the Litani, and obviously benefit also from the soil of South Lebanon, because it's very a very fertile soil. So this invasion plan, southern Lebanon, in this invasion plan, basically southern Lebanon is to become Israel's new north, right? The problem is that when Israel invades Lebanon in 1982, Lebanon is already very destabilized by a civil war that had been going on for 7 years, started in 1975. So Israel takes advantage of two factors: the destabilization of the Lebanese political players and the fact that the Lebanese army is absolutely incapable, unable to defend its territory. And by the way, I'm opening just a bracket here. The Lebanese army has always been an army that had they didn't have the capacity of defending their territory. It has always been understaffed, under-equipped, under-trained. So as a result of the invasion, we had a series of spontaneous resistance groups springing up among left-wing progressist circles, but also among Shia religious milieus. And among those new military groups that emerged to fight back the Israeli invasion, one of them was the Islamic resistance in Lebanon, Al-Muqawama Al-Islamiyya fi Lebanon, IRL, okay, this is the way it called itself, and it gave itself the mission to basically send the Israelis back on the other side of the border. Now, a few months later, this Islamic resistance that was at the time completely clandestine, they realized that they were going to need very soon to add to their structure or to their organization a civil wing, a complementary wing. That wing, basically, they thought should be a kind of a network of social institutions, media, mobilization associations. The point of that network was to establish a hyphen, a link between that clandestine Islamic resistance and its Shiite community in Lebanon, but also the rest of the Lebanese population at large. The idea was also to charge this network with helping with the war effort through all sorts of supports to the population that was to suffer from Israeli retaliations to the resistance actions. So they built that network of civil institutions. They added medical centers, hospitals, pharmacies. They also added a reconstruction company, etc. And that's the network of those institutions and civil structures to support the war effort. And that work as a coordinated network around the Islamic resistance, that's what we call Hezbollah. So when we say Hezbollah quickly, usually in the media, etc., we tend to cover both that civil part and also the military. What we don't understand is that it's an organization that is twofold. We have two kind of organizations. They are obviously very interconnected, but that's two organizations. We have the military part, the Islamic resistance, and then we have Hezbollah, that more into politics, social action, media mobilization. So when we say Hezbollah is fighting in Syria, for instance, no, Hezbollah is not fighting in Syria. It's the Islamic resistance that is fighting in Syria. But obviously, to make things easier to understand, most people go with just Hezbollah to cover both parts of the organization.
I mean, it's obviously kind of already in your title, right? Which is like mobilization and power, like a dichotomy, although I mean, that might refer to something else, but there is like this dichotomy of these two organizations. And I mean, obviously, even for someone looking from the outside, that is difficult to like keep apart. Okay, you're saying now there is a military one, there is a civil one. It's are they kind of independent organizations, doing their thing, but towards a common goal? Or is there like a umbrella organization? Like, how does it work? Can you maybe give a little bit detail on these, on this double character of Hezbollah?
Yes, absolutely. So the IRL and Hezbollah, they function in a complementary way, but we also have to understand that there's a kind of a hierarchy relationship between the two. So the mother of organization, the matrix, is the IRL, is the military. That's the core of that double organization. That's also what determines its real identity. And then there's that little, collection of civil organizations that are working towards, as I said, supporting the war effort. So they work complementary. Now, a lot of observers and commentators, they have argued, for instance, that Hezbollah is an Islamist group with an armed wing that could help it implement, for instance, religious decisions into the Lebanese society, or force them on the Lebanese government. That's not correct. It doesn't work like that. Well, first of all, first thing we need to make very clear is that Hezbollah has no intention of establishing an Islamic regime in Lebanon, not even, by the way, in the Shia areas where it is present and well settled. We have to understand that the situation is reversed. Okay, that's very important to really understand that it is first and foremost a military group. The first and foremost objective is to defend the Lebanese national territory against what is seen by Hezbollah as the Israeli capacité de nuisance against Lebanon. So the civil part is here to help the military. And that's there's a metaphor, or there's a comparison that, not a metaphor, excuse me, let me correct that. There's an example, a comparison that I really like to use because it makes it so much easier for Western people to visualize. The way Hezbollah and the IRL function, the way they articulate, they work together is quite similar to what we had ourselves in Europe a few years ago in Ireland. I don't know if any of you remember something called the Irish Republican Army, and they used to work, with the Sinn Féin. So there was a couple, IRA, Sinn Féin. So the IRA was the power engine of the couple, I would say, fighting, but they were also the military. They were fighting on the ground, and then the Sinn Féin was the political and media window pane, if you want, of the IRA, and they were also working on transforming the gains of the IRA in the field into political dividends on the negotiation table with the British. And Hezbollah and the Islamic resistance work exactly the same way.
Okay, I can already hear Western propagandists stomping their feet and saying, wait. You just said they are not, they don't want to create an Islamic regime in Lebanon. At the same time, your book also makes clear, they have a particular vision and understanding of what politics is. And I mean, on the one hand, IRL, it says Islamic Resistance of Lebanon. Hassan Nasrallah, apparently, it is also a quote that is often brought up, has said a few years ago that the Islamic regime would be kind of the best systems of all. So how do you reconcile this with the notion that it's not really Islamist in this sense, how we understand Islamist today, which is a political project of establishing Islamic rule, right? Yeah. How do you reconcile this? Yes.
Okay. What you said about Hassan Nasrallah is true enough, but he also said in the same sentence that an Islamic regime, he said, while we consider that an Islamic regime is the ideal regime, it is not possible in a country like Lebanon, who has so many different sectarian communities. And he said, if I recall well, he said that if one day, through, demographic change, we have a growing Shia community in Lebanon, that's just, natural rules of demography. But so he said that if one day that would become possible, he insisted on the fact that an Islamic regime should be established at the request of the society itself, the Lebanese themselves. And he talked about the need for a referendum. And he said an Islamic state in Lebanon should see the light only if more than 90% of the Lebanese would vote for. So it's a little bit funny because in a way, so he's still, voicing his support of his, Islamic identity, etc. But at the same time, the way he's depicting it and the way he is, the terms that he himself puts for the existence of such a state kind of makes it impossible, to become a fact. And, I'm a sociologist, so I love the field and I love facts way more than words. That's me. And I think here that when it comes to Hezbollah's intentions toward an Islamic regime or Islamization of politics in Lebanon, at the end of the day, facts speak louder than words. And it is true that Hezbollah presents itself as a group of pious, conservative people. Okay, no need to invite them for a beer in a pub after an interview. That's not going to work. All the same, it is interesting to notice that they have never mixed religion and politics in the political institutional life in Lebanon. That's a fact. They never, ever did that. Even something interesting is, even when they build their argumentation in parliament, for instance, when you have like national debates and they disagree with other parties, etc., the way they make their point, they never, ever, 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 ever use religious considerations to make their points. Never. So, funnily enough, they're 100% secularly, politically, I would say, or they're 100% secularly political when they talk or practice politics in Lebanon. Another thing that we need to keep in mind, I think, is that let's suppose that in some years that's going to change. Let's suppose that in some years a new leadership of Hezbollah is going to think of trying to establish an Islamic regime in Lebanon, at least in the Shia areas of Lebanon, because there had been some talk a few years ago about probably they're not strong enough to impose an Islamic, Islamic principles to the central power in Lebanon, but they can do that in the areas, in the Shia areas where they're present. Well, I can tell you, for having grown up in Shia areas without being a Shia myself, but having grown up in Shia areas in Lebanon, I can assure you that while the Shia, in their vast majority, support Hezbollah, and mainly, obviously, the military identity of Hezbollah, they, like the same vast majority, wouldn't want to hear about an Islamic ruling in Lebanon, okay? Not even in their areas. So the Shia are not interested in going into like something like we have in Iran. And Hezbollah, well, at least so far, they never thought of imposing it by force. I don't think they intend to do so right now. So yes, while Hezbollah's identity is attached to Islam and Islamic principle and values, that does not structure their understanding and practice of politics. They keep it more for the private life or the collective religious life, the Shia life. But when it comes to politics, they're always very careful. The fact that, okay, we have other communities, we don't want to antagonize anyone, so keep religion aside.
And I just have a follow-up question to this, because that begs the question, and maybe you have a quick answer for this. Why then, in the first place, make Islam part of your public identity when this is not really something that you want to achieve politically, or at least you are saying, yeah, it would be nice to have it, but yeah, it's not going to happen soon. Why appeal to Islam and this religious conservatism principles, values in the first place?
Well, initially, when we look at what I call in the book the proto-Hezbollah network, so basically the networks or the little association groups that will eventually, or from which eventually will emerge the first cohorts of Hezbollah. So they were, initially pious people, religious people who thought that eventually that communism and secularism, especially in the Shia community, didn't bring anything positive to the Lebanese or to the Shia. Plus, we have to keep in mind that, in the 80s, I was talking about the civil war. So the Lebanese were becoming tiresome of the violence, tiresome of the war, etc. The Shia were still in the 80s, what we called at some point a community of the peripheries, in all the senses of the term, meaning peripheries, geographical peripheries. They're in the extreme south, they're in the northeast at the border with Syria, and then they're in the suburbs of Beirut, so they're not even inside the capital city. And they were obviously the poorest, the less educated. Socially, their situation was really difficult, economically too. They were having a hard time with the Israeli occupation and the retaliation with the Palestinians in the south. And for some Shia, after a while, to keep up, certain people started to find in religion, a way to maintain spirits high, or at least to find a consolation or a reason for suffering, all that, the absurdity of the war. So we had people in the Shia community, trying to revive, a religious spirits in a community that was at that time, like really largely on the progressive, secular, communist side, as I said. And those people, when Israel invaded at some point, and obviously there's the Shia dimension of it, the Shia, in their understanding of Islam, give a very important weight to the notion of justice. They are still, feeling, at least at the religious level, for what happened to the grandson of the Prophet, who was assassinated by the Umayyad Caliph Yazid, etc. So the notion of justice and the notion of, religion asks us to defend ourselves. So it's not the UN chart that talks about the right to self-defense here. It's our faith, basically, that talks about not only the right to self-defense, but also the duty of defending ourselves, of not letting an external force, an ill-willing force, take our lands, destroy our houses, kill our women and children. We cannot just be bystanders. We have to move. So they initially took that, I would say, the will they needed, or the energy they needed, to transform that sense of that indignation in the face of the invasion into a militia. Okay, they brought that inspiration from religion. Okay, it's a religious duty, but it's also, it's a duty, and we don't want, in a way, it's like we're gonna do what we didn't do for Hussein. We're gonna do for ourselves what we didn't do for Hussein hundreds of years ago. But in the same time, very quickly, the sources and origins of Hezbollah's rationality became a way more mixed bag. There's a lot of patriotism, attachment to the land, to Lebanon, the love of Lebanon. It's not just about Islam, and it's not. And again, it was about, even in its Islamic inspiration, it was about defending that territory, defending your society, defending your community, defending your homes. It wasn't about bringing Islam into politics. That wasn't part of the debate. Absolutely not.
Okay, very interesting. I mean, it's funny how crazy the disconnect is to perception and narrative here, right? So one of the things that now pops up in Germany, I don't know if you've heard that, Netanyahu probably has said it a couple of times, but Hezbollah is Daesh or something like this. So what I hear from you is that this kind of Islamist policy that you would rather, attach to the Muslim Brotherhood maybe, or to Al-Qaeda, or to the Islamic State, Daesh, that doesn't really fit to Hezbollah as an organization. Yeah, okay, you're saying correct. Maybe you can elaborate on this, and then maybe also a comparison with Hamas, as they are, somehow in their public perception now allying and fighting the same cause, at least. How do they compare?
Oh my God, no. So Hezbollah have really nothing in common with Al Qaeda or ISIS or the Islamic State or Jabhat Tahrir al-Sham, the former Jabhat al-Nusra. And actually in Syria and Iraq, Hezbollah, or the Islamic resistance, I should say, have even been fighting against Salafi jihadi groups like Al Qaeda and the Islamic State. And by the way, it's a mutual loathing. They loathe each other. Now, funny enough, well, Osama bin Laden, because he had a Syrian mother, a Syrian Alawi, meaning Shia mother, that was his dirty little secret. Osama bin Laden had at some point a semi-secret, half recognized admiration for Hezbollah for their efficiency in Lebanon against the Israeli occupation. Unfortunately for bin Laden, the admiration was never reciprocal. Never did anyone in Hezbollah appreciate Al-Qaeda or bin Laden at all. So you mentioned Hamas. Okay, Hamas, it's a little bit different. Hamas, well, first of all, the relationship between Hezbollah and Hamas, it's complicated. Wasn't really a love story all the time. The relationship had its ups and downs. All the same, so obviously, today, especially today, with what is happening in Palestine / Israel and then South Lebanon, at the military level, I would say they're pretty much on the same page. Okay, so Netanyahu kind of brought them back together seriously. But we have to keep in mind that Hamas is, at the end of the day, the Muslim Brothers in their Palestinian versions. So they do believe in some room for politics in religion. They weigh more into bringing religion into politics than Hezbollah. And at some point in their history, they also tried. We saw them, for instance, try to exert some sort of compulsory social control, religious control over the Palestinian communities. Hezbollah is absolutely not about that, as I said. So it's the military comes first, and if religion in the social, religious in the social realm eventually contradicts the interests of the military, then the religious dimension will lose, I would say. Hamas, if you want, is first and foremost an Islamist organization, and then they added the military extension. Hezbollah, it's the other way around, basically. Hezbollah came second. It's the military part, the Islamic resistance, that came first. So it really impacts the order of priorities in each organization. Hamas is quite about Islam. Hezbollah is way more about armed action. Religion is just one way, among others, to mobilize and support the war effort. But for Hezbollah, it's, in a way, it's a little bit heretic. I'm going to talk a little bit like a heretic, but for Hezbollah, in practice, it's Islam who should support the military effort, and not the military effort who should be at the service of Islam, if you see what I mean.
All right. And maybe then we come away from the question whether they want to have a Islamic State, and we just talk a little bit about what their actual rule. I mean, it's difficult to say that they have a regime, but they are kind of de facto ruling maybe the Bekaa Valley. Maybe, if you go to Dahia in Beirut, it's very much Shia, and it's quite a different atmosphere and culture, let's say, than if you go to some of the other suburbs in Beirut. Sorry.
Yes, of course.
So how is it living there? I mean, you obviously also grew up in an area like that. Can you just said, okay, you can't go with the clerics to have a beer, etc., but can you just hang out in the streets, do your stuff? Or like, is it because they are so pious, is it then, this kind of religious repression that people imagine when they hear that?
That's a very good question. Well, first of all, we need to keep in mind that notion of having a political force kind of not ruling exactly, that's not you were right about precising that's not the appropriate word, but kind of being really very present and impacting the local life. That's more about that. The fact that that notion of having a political force impacting the politics and the social life of an area is not typical to Hezbollah. We have to keep in mind that we're talking about Lebanon, right? So Lebanon is a country that counts officially 18 official sects, which is actually quite a nice number for a country that is as big as 1/3 of Belgium. Half the state of New Jersey, and whose population, and I'm talking about the Lebanese living in Lebanon, is maybe twice the population of Paris, something like that. So 18 official sects, We have Christians, we have Muslims, we have a bit of Jews. So yes, I mean, we do have areas that are kind of Hezbollah areas, but at the end of the day, they remain mixed areas, okay? When Lebanon was created in 1920, so the Christians initially outnumbered the Muslims. There was some talk about roughly 55% for the Christians, 45% for the Muslims, but very quickly, the Muslims outnumber the Christians. Today, I would say we don't have any official census. We didn't have one since 1932. So
okay.
Yeah. We still owe it to the French, actually. It's the French who organized it. But roughly, let's put it this way, the most serious estimations say that we have today in Lebanon between 25%, 30% of Christians. And then the rest, that's Lebanon. So Lebanon is mixed, and yes, but then we have areas that are maybe a little bit more Sunni, more Shia, more Christian. So it is a fact. It is a fact that Hezbollah never bothers people living in its areas, especially when they're not Shia. So they can be way more, compelling or severe, or at least they might comment on what you do. It's never compulsory, okay? But they might comment on what you do, give you a piece of advice, even if you don't ask it. When you're a Shia, but when you're not a Shia and you deal with Hezbollah, they're going to be super tolerant. They're going to basically let everything slide, okay? And that's a fact in their areas. Everybody, I'm talking Lebanese, is welcome in the Hezbollah areas. You can be a Sunni, a Christian, and buy a house in a Hezbollah area. Nobody will ever say you're not welcome. Quite the opposite. And Hezbollah, in this regard, wanted to get rid, or I think they succeeded in getting rid of a kind of a nasty image they had in the 80s, where people depicted them as kind of, violent savages. They're all like Shia, like they're fundamentalists, etc. They're not open to religious differences.
I think there was this acid attack on a Lebanese beach or something like this that was attributed to Shia, right? Or am I mixing that up now? It's something from my childhood that I heard. And
I'm not sure about
some
that.
Some woman in a bathing suit got attacked with acid. And
there was that story about acid. Yeah, they also said that Hezbollah used it in Baalbek. Honestly, I never heard about that. But acid, you might have maybe a zealous, taking initiatives. But Hezbollah never recommended that, never ordered that. That I'm pretty sure of that. So one has to admit, and we have to be honest here. Hezbollah is really open to the various community. Now, at the day-to-day level, if you want, that means that people are rather free to live the way they want in Hezbollah area. Now, within limits, like, for instance, you're not going to find restaurants in Hezbollah areas that serve alcohol, right? But that's more related to the fact that you are in a Muslim area than because it is Hezbollah itself, okay? Because, for instance, Hezbollah knows that a lot of people in their areas drink alcohol, have sexual intercourse out of wedlock. They just usually turn a blind eye, as long as people, of course, have the decency of being a little bit discreet about what they do, and basically you can do whatever you want in your homes or with your neighbors, as long as you're not in a provocative thing on the streets. When it comes to Christians, especially, they can have their liquor stores, they can sell pork meat, etc. That's perfectly okay. Hezbollah is totally fine. I remember when I was a few years ago. So I was, walking on the streets of my town in Baalbek, and I could see there was that little battalion of IRA, going on the streets. So let's talk, 12, 14 guys, marching in the military. I don't know. They were probably going to somewhere, to a meeting, and they passed way before a liquor store by Christian person. He's a very important character in my hometown. He died, unfortunately, was an old man. Abu George was his name. Abu George. So Abu George used to stand on the door of his liquor store all the time. And everybody knew it was a liquor store. And, so I was rather discreet about it. But that year, he decided to renovate the whole window pane of his store. And he made like that huge window pane with shelves. And he wanted to do something fancy. And what he did is like probably on a dozen shelves that came like from the roof, of his store to the floor, a dozen shelves. He covered them with bottles of G&B whiskey. So you had in the window pane, I know, something like 100 or 150 bottles, showing on the street. And then I stopped. I want to see how the IRL battalion is going to react. They're going to first see, that magnificent advertisement for G&B. And what they did, because everybody knows Abu George, the officer, the head of the battalions, as they were marching and going right in front of the store, he gave a salute, the military salute to Abu George, saying, "Hey, kifak Abu George?" And Abu George just answered back, "Hey boys, have a great day." And I was like, "Oh my God, why didn't I have my camera on me to picture this?" This is so. Yeah, living in a Hezbollah area. Especially, as I said, when you're Shia, it's really something easy. My mom is French. I grew up as a kid who's half French, and I am not a Shia, and all my life we could walk on the streets of Baalbek, for instance, in the summer, wearing shorts and going, with sleeveless T-shirts, and nobody ever said anything to anybody. It's not like in Iran or Saudi Arabia where you have what they call, morality patrols or whatnot. No, they're rather quite indifferent to what you do, as long as I said that you don't threaten, their interests, as long as, they're rather inclusive. They'd rather have as many people on their side than people against them. And one way to do it is not to make enemies by mistakes. So they don't want to antagonize the Lebanese, who support they need in their fight against Israel. No need to antagonize the Lebanese, especially Lebanese from other communities, just for the sake of, religious and dressing something conservative or not. And I'm going to give you an example. Again, my personal example as a scholar working on Hezbollah. When it comes to dealing with Hezbollah members themselves on a daily basis, it's also easy to. Now, of course, when I'm a female, when I meet a male, we're not going to shake hands because they don't shake hands between males and females who are not part of the family. But all the same, that's a more religious Muslim conservative thing. Some Sunnis do it too, But for instance, I can perfectly, as a female and, even as a single female, I can be alone in a car with a Hezbollah member. I can be alone in a room with a Hezbollah male. Nobody will ever see anything wrong to it. You won't even have comments or gossip in your back. And you do your interviews with Hezbollah. You can come with shirt sleeves, and you don't have to wear a veil unless, obviously, when you meet a cleric. When you wear a cleric, okay, you cover a little bit your hair. But then again, that's not a Hezbollah thing. All women do that in the presence of any kind of Muslim clerics in the Middle East. So it's just out of respect, for their status of cleric, and that's all. So on a daily basis, they're rather easy to live with.
Okay, that's very interesting. Maybe let's come to one of the key questions that people here might have. You already mentioned there are some Jews in Lebanon. And of course, one of the big talking points about Hezbollah, just like about Hamas and actually anybody else that opposes Israel, is they are anti-Semites. They want to destroy Israel. So maybe before we come to that second talking point, really its relationship to the state of Israel, let's talk a little bit about the Jews in Lebanon. How does Hezbollah relate to those?
It's a very relevant question. So we do have a bit of Jews in Lebanon, not that many, and unfortunately, let's be honest, most of them actually left in the 70s, with the start of the Civil War. So we don't have many of them anymore, unfortunately. And most of them were actually in Beirut, and a little bit in the mountain. So Hezbollah's relationship to Judaism. Hezbollah presents itself as an anti-Zionist organization, but they insist on the fact that they're not anti-Semitic. Okay, so they explain that their problem is with Israel as a state, with Zionism as an ideology, as a political ideology, as a colonial ideology. That's the way they see it, but not with Judaism per se. Judaism, as a faith, as a spiritual system. Obviously, we said they are Islamic in their identities. Islam recognizes, as I said, the people of the book, etc. We're cousins, all of us, with the Muslims, Christians, and Jews in the adoration of the one God. Now, that does not mean that you will never meet an anti-Semitic person in the Hezbollah organization. But that's not the line of the party. Okay. And what is interesting, again, if you look at the facts and not just the words, because somebody could say, they're just hypocrites, a bunch of hypocrites. What I find interesting is, for instance, that I never heard anyone in Hezbollah, for instance, expressing any, whether openly or privately, an admiration for Adolf Hitler or Nazism. Interestingly enough, and contrary to what we had heard, for instance, from some Iranian presidents, starting with Mahmoud Ahmadinejad, for instance, they do not deny the fact that the Holocaust happened. They don't think it was a humanist thing to do at all. And funnily enough, when they are super pissed with some Israeli government or some Israeli declaration, etc., very easily they're going to call the Israeli official a Nazi, meaning that Nazism is, again, it's not something they admire, and quite the opposite. Even for Hezbollah, Nazism is still some of the worst, if not the worst, ideology, and the violence related to Nazism is the utmost of inhumanity. And so I remember there was, like, in 2006, during the 33-day war, at some point, Al-Manar, Hezbollah's television, they made a little video clip, a sarcastic video clip about Ehud Olmert, who was then the former prime minister. And at some point, I don't know why, he kind of, he raised his right hand, his right arm, a little bit like a Hitlerian salute, probably because he was reaching, to something, or he was, pointing at something. And that was just after the Kana massacre. Israel bombarded a refugee or a basement where dozens of handicapped children took refuge to escape the bombardment, and they kept bombarding it, and they that day killed something like 50 people. Anyway, that was absolutely horrible, and Hezbollah was really super pissed about that. So they made that little video clip about Ehud Olmert. So you see Ehud Olmert talking in Hebrew, etc., and suddenly he raises that arm, his right arm, in the Hitlerian way, and suddenly the colors of the screen changes, and you could see, like, the little mustache growing, the Hitlerian mustache growing under the nose of Ehud Olmert, and then his hair, going to the side, just the way Hitler used to combat. So they do call their worst enemies Nazis. So yeah, they really insist on that, on the fact that they're not anti-Semitic. And I even recall now, I think it was in 2004 or 2005, something like that. It was a little bit before the end of the tutelage, etc. But Hezbollah itself organized that big international religious event in Beirut, a kind of ecumenical event. And they flew at their expense. They paid for all the tickets. They flew into Lebanon for the conference, priests and rabbis from everywhere in the world to participate in the discussions. Obviously, we're talking about anti-Zionist rabbis, right? We're not talking about like Israeli regular Zionist rabbis. Okay, so Hezbollah technically, like and officially in practice, has no problems with the Jews as such. I also remember, by the way, now, I think it was 2008 and 2009, something like that. There was some talk at the Lebanese parliament of renovating the Magen Abraham synagogue in Beirut. It's one of the biggest and one of the most beautiful ones. And unfortunately, it had been, left as it was, damaged from the civil wars. So it had been kind of sitting there for 40 years and nobody's taking care of it, etc. So there was some talk at the parliament about, trying to have all the political parties in Lebanon chip in, put a little bit of their personal budget and fix it and bring people who knew how to fix it and do it like the Jewish way properly, etc. And Hezbollah was like perfectly okay. They said, yeah, we're gonna chip in. They paid actually quite a large sum to renovate the synagogue. Another thing is every time there are swap operations of both combatants or corpses of combatants between Israel and Hezbollah. So because it happens, you fight, you kill some of your enemies, you grab the corpses and you keep them kind of dead hostages to exchange them later. So interestingly enough, there was a declaration by a high-ranked general in the Israeli army in 2008, if I recall well. Don't ask me the name of the guy, I don't remember. But that was very interesting because in 2008 we had a major swap operation, and Hezbollah sent a few dead bodies of Israeli soldiers, Jewish soldiers, back to Israel. And the general said we were really happily surprised with the fact that Hezbollah cleaned the corpses and prepared the corpses and released the corpses to us. They did everything perfectly by the book according to Jewish traditions. Okay. So that's really important. And when you listen to Hassan Nasrallah, by the way, who is the Secretary General of the party, you will never find a shred of anti-Semitism in what he says. Never. And funny enough, actually, there's something funny about his speeches when he talks to the Israelis. He always have two different speeches for the Israelis, kind of two paragraphs. When he talks to the Israelis, it's always, he differentiates. There's the talk to the Israeli government and army on one side, and then the Israeli society. So yes, he's very severe to the Israeli government. He can even call them names. He called Benjamin Netanyahu an imbecile so many times. He called the Israeli army a bunch of butchers so many times. But when it comes to the Israeli society, it's never aggressive. It's always respectful, and that's I think is very telling.
Okay, but then maybe coming to the last point that really is also central, of course, to Hezbollah's politics, which is Israel, the relationship to Israel as a state, and there again, I'm coming from all these talking points that we hear here. It's clear Hezbollah wants to exterminate Israel for everybody here. So what do we say for that? Isn't that something that at least someone like Hassan Nasrallah would have said in a speech, or is a public line in Hezbollah to actually exterminate Israel, wipe it from the map as it is?
Yes, we did have sometimes like slogans like Israel is a cancer, that we need to take out from the Middle East, etc. We did have like metaphors that could have been a little bit extreme. But well, first of all, I'm going to talk as a scholar, as somebody who's into political science. First of all, we need to keep in mind that I'm not sure the notion of exterminating a country is a relevant one, in the sense that what does it mean technically in terms of feasibility, in terms of, concretely, what does it mean to wipe a country from the face of the earth? You don't erase a country as long as there are the other countries to recognize the existence of this country and its government. A country is first and foremost, it's a legal notion. It's a judicial notion. Now, of course, you can bring serious material and human damage to a country. You can destroy a country in the sense that you can destroy the building, the houses, the offices. You can kill a vast number of people, but you cannot erase a country from a map. So that's in terms of political science, that's absolutely not possible. Now, when it comes to Hezbollah's capacité de nuisance towards Israel, again, there's big phrases like, we're going to wipe Israel, na. Those slogans are actually quite old now. They're absolutely not recent. And they're way more circumstantial. They're more in the category of metaphorical discourse than something we really need to take at face value. When you're angry, how many parents said to their children, "I'm going to kill you"? But I'm exaggerating a little bit, but in my comparison. But
I did not, because I would be dead.
But, again, I would say facts talk louder than words. Look at Hezbollah and what Hezbollah has done in 40 years of existence, okay? In 40 years of existence, at the end of the day, the Islamic resistance never invaded Israel. In 40 years, we saw Israel invade Lebanon so many times and try to annexate seriously Lebanon, like for real. But the Islamic resistance never invaded Israel. They never even bombarded Israel unless it was in retaliation for Israeli attacks. And even Israeli generals admit that. They say every time they send rockets, especially between 2000 and 2006, for instance, or between 2006 and now, basically, it's because we kind of went and we had it coming. Okay. And then again, we have to keep in mind that before 2023, Hezbollah never launched rockets on Israel that went further than 75 kilometers deep into Israeli territory. I mean, the Israeli territory until now that was really under threat, like serious threat of Hezbollah, was mainly the north, and even still today, where we can
they reached like close to Haifa, I think, in 2006 with
Haifa,
one or two rockets or something.
Yeah, something like that. Haifa was like a kind of a limit, like that's the border. We're not going anywhere. So there's another thing. So that's that. Okay, they never invaded. Israel. They never really took any initiative to destroy Israel. But what I find actually even more telling and more interesting is that the devil is in the details, and we have small things that actually show that can be interpreted as an indirect recognition by Hezbollah of the state of Israel. And I think that the way Hezbollah sees it, in the ideal thing we could have is maybe an end to the state of Israel as a legal identity, but that wouldn't mean like deporting all the Israelis, I don't know, to Europe or to North Africa or to whatever. Probably what they see as the best solution is a binational state or a Palestinian state where the former Israelis would, turn into Palestinians. But when talking about the small details, there's one really that came to my mind, and I keep thinking of it, like especially now with everything that is happening, like in the last few days. In 2007, Hassan Nasrallah actually, literally, openly, explicitly congratulated the Israeli society for what they are. Now, the circumstances were a little bit particular, but he kind of shocked a lot of people. It was like, whoa, that's destabilizing coming from him. So it was a few months after the end of the summer 2006 war. And the Israeli parliament at that time, they asked for a full investigation on what went wrong in the war. Because, initially Israel started its offensive by saying, we are going to bring our soldiers home, and we are, most importantly, are going to exterminate Hezbollah. That's another notion that absolutely has no meaning in political science. You cannot exterminate Hezbollah or exterminate Hamas. It doesn't work like that. But anyway, so the Israelis promised their society that they were going to exterminate Hezbollah, and they were going to exterminate Hezbollah in 1 week. 33 days later, Hezbollah was in the greatest shape, and nothing, and zero objectives announced by the Israelis was achieved. Anyway, so obviously the parliament, the Knesset, was a little bit worried, like what went wrong, like where, we want to improve. And in order to improve, basically, you want to know what is there to fix. So they organized that Winograd Commission. I don't know if you remember it. It was headed by a magistrate called Eliyahu Winograd. That's why this is where the commission took its name from. Anyways, so the reports that were delivered by the Winograd Commission were very severe for both the political establishment and the military/intel establishment. Basically, the army was basically cheated of a bunch of completely incompetent. The Mossad did a terrible work, and the political establishment went to war without any serious plan. It was a completely hazardous operation. And when the Winograd Commission basically broadcasted or basically published their results, obviously, as you can imagine, Hezbollah was very happy. And Hassan Nasrallah congratulated the Israeli society by saying that he saluted them for their real and true sense of democracy. And then, because he's a very sarcastic person, he added that he said, if only we had the same transparency and sense of accountability at home in Lebanon. So he turned his congratulation of the Israeli society into a kind of a bashing of the Lebanese politicians. Yeah. But all the same, I found that very interesting because in a way he was saying, yeah, you guys are here. We understand you're here. We know you're not going anywhere. And you guys do have lots of, obviously, nasty aspects, but you also have virtues and qualities, and we are honest enough to acknowledge them. And I really thought that was something.
Yeah, I can imagine how people reacted to this when they heard this. I mean, in the end, he's kind of reiterating one of the lines that we hear today too about Israel. Israel is a different player than everybody else because they investigate their rapes and their abuses and their mass murders, etc. But at the same time, he's turning that around as like a slap to all people. That's so
something. One stone, two birds.
Exactly. Okay, Aurélie, thanks a lot for this primer where we basically attacked a couple of of these talking points and these ideas that are very common about Hezbollah to clear out the way for what's coming next in this little series. We're going to talk a little bit about the origins of Hezbollah, the reason why it's so popular in Lebanon, how Hezbollah relates to Lebanese politics in the first place. Some people call it a party now, And then, of course, there is this last step that you already mentioned, Hezbollah going regional, going world politics, and what kind of friends do they have, what kind of foes, putting that into relation. Let's see how many episodes this will become. We stay in touch, and in the next weeks we'll follow up with this. All right?
Well, thank you very much for the invitation, and bon courage to everybody.
Thanks a lot, Aurélie, and see you next time. Bye-bye.
Leute, wir brauchen eure Hilfe. Wenn euch dieses Video gefallen hat, klickt auf Like, abonniert den Kanal und vergesst nicht das Glöckchen zu drücken, damit ihr benachrichtigt werdet, wenn wir neuen Content droppen.
Außerdem solltet ihr uns überall folgen, wo wir verfügbar sind. Das ist Facebook, Instagram, Twitter und Twitch. Und wenn wir irgendwelche Ankündigungen machen oder Posts, dann shared, was das Zeug hält. Gebt uns all eure Liebe.
Ja, mittlerweile ziemlich signifikante Kosten. Wenn ihr es euch irgendwie leisten könnt, unterstützt uns doch auf Patreon. Dann kommt ihr auch in den Genuss verschiedener Vorteile, wie zum Beispiel Zugang zu unserer Discord-Community oder Zugang zu den ultra-geheimen Patreon-Episoden, die wir dort posten. Außerdem könnt ihr uns natürlich auch über PayPal Spenden zukommen lassen.
Außerdem haben wir mittlerweile einen eigenen Online-Shop. Das heißt, wenn ihr euch immer noch fragt, was ihr euren Lieben zu Weihnachten, Ostern oder sonst wie schenken könnt, geht dorthin und kauft duftes Merch.
Alle Links dazu hier in der Beschreibung oder auch auf unserer Webseite 99zu1.de.
Vielen Dank fürs Dabeisein, danke für die Unterstützung und wir sehen uns in diesem Theater.